In this period of time that we're in, where distraction is such a serious problem for all of us, we tend to think of distraction as something which temporarily takes our mind off what we're focused on, and that it's a temporary lapse and we can recover our concentration a little bit later. It's just an interruption. But distraction isn't always that. Distraction can actually eradicate some of the things we know, and not just in terms of factual knowledge, but can eradicate wisdom. Even the most profound wisdom that we've acquired can be eradicated and lost. There's a difference between something which you've forgotten, meaning you can't recall it. Sometimes you forget the name of a close friend of yours. It doesn't mean you've forgotten it. It just means you're unable to recall it at that moment. And then a few minutes later, it comes to you, you remember. That's one kind of forgetting, an inability to recall. But there's another kind of forgetting where it's no longer there. It's actually gone. And that kind of forgetting is what we're going to be talking about. And we're going to learn a hack from the Rambam as to how to avoid that, how to remain focused, among other things today. We start with a posuk in Sefer Shmos, "V'hayo ha'metzach Aaron v'nasa Aaron et avon ha'kodashim asher yagdishu b'nei Yisrael l'chol matnos kodshehem." This is talking about the tzitz, the forehead plate which the Kohen Gadol wears, which we've learnt about quite a lot previously. But the words that are important for us here are "V'haya al mitzcho tamid l'ratzon lahem lifnei Hashem." The tzitz must be on his forehead at all times. And the Chazal and the Mefarshim and the Posuk speak about the fact it doesn't have to be on his forehead at all times. What does it mean? Omar Rabba bar Rav Huna in our Gemara on Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis. Chayav adam lemashmesh betfillin b'chol sha'ah. A person has to touch his tefillin all the time while you've got your tefillin on. And we learn that kal vachomer mitzitz. We learn that from the tzitz. Uma tzitz she'ein bo ela azkara achat. Amra Torah v'hayal mitzcho tamid. Shelo taseach da'ato mimenu. The tzitz which only has the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, God's name, once written on it, he has to keep his mind on the tzitz and not take his mind off the tzitz even for a moment. Tefillin shesh ben azkarot harbe alachat kama v'kama. In the case of tefillin, there are 21 mentions of, in each of the tefillin, there's 21 mentions of Hashem's name, and therefore, all the more so, we cannot take our mind off it. Says the Rambam, we'll come back to the Gemara in a moment. There are two Rambams. Before we get to the Rambam, so the Gemara is saying you have to touch the tefillin constantly because you're not allowed to be mesiach dat, because you're not allowed to take your mind off them. Says the Rambam, mitzta'eru mishein da'ato miyushevet u'nechona alav, a person who's got a lot of tzoros going on, he's worried, there are things happening, he's either in physical pain or emotional pain, and therefore his mind isn't settled. Patur min tefillin. I think that includes most of us. Our minds aren't settled. We can't focus. So actually, put on tefillin, you don't have to put on tefillin. That's not a good thing. That means that if you put on tefillin, you're an eina mechuyev. You're putting on tefillin, you're not even obligated. We have to be the right kind of person, which means not just biologically that we have to be a Jewish male, but we also have to be in the right state of mind. Otherwise, there's no chiyuv tefillin. You put them in tefillin. And the state of mind is that we're not mitzta'er, and that our da'at is miyushevet aleinu. That our minds are settled. We've got to settle our minds before we put on tefillin. Sha'aminiach tefillin asur lo la'asir da'ato mehem. Because if you've got tefillin on, you're not allowed to be thinking of anything else at that time. You can't take your mind off the tefillin. Then the Rambam says in the next halacha, חייב אדם למשמש בתפילין כל זמן שאין עליו, שלא יסיח דעתו מהם אפילו רגע אחת. A person must touch his tefillin constantly and not take his mind, so that he doesn't take his mind off his tefillin, even for a moment. Important words. שקדושתן גדולה מקדושת הציץ. Because the kedusha of tefillin is more than the kedusha of the tzitz. Imagine when the Mashiach comes, we'll see the Kohen Gadol wearing the tzitz, how amazed we're going to be with that level of sanctity on his forehead plate and what it means and what it's capable of doing. Yes, but every day you put on tefillin, you're putting something on more powerful than a tzitz. שהציץ אין בו אלא שם אחד, ואלו יש בהם 21 שם של י'-ק' ו'-ק' בשל ראש וחומתם בשל יד. Tefillin shel rosh and shel yad have 21 mentions of Hashem's name. It's much more powerful than the tzitz itself. What I was fascinated by in the Rambam is the order of these two halachot. It's in the second halacha that he states the principle that we're not allowed to take our minds off the the tefillin, and we learn that from tzitz. That's the origin of that law. We learn that from the tzitz in our Gemara here on Menachos Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis. That being the case, that should be the first halacha. Then, as a result of that, therefore, if your mind is all over the place and you're unable to focus on the tefillin, you're parted from tefillin. Surely they should be the other way around. But the way I understand the Rambam is learning the Gemara. The halacha is your mind has to be on the tefillin. What's this thing if you've got to touch the tefillin all the time? The Rambam's teaching us the Gemara is teaching us an important psychological principle, and that is physical connection focuses mental attention. They're not two separate things. How are you mekayim? You've got to keep your mind on the tefillin all the time. The hack is keep on touching them. If you're touching your tefillin, if you're feeling your tefillin, you're conscious and aware of them, you'll keep your mind on them. And that works conversely as well. If you're holding your cell phone in your hand, your mind is on your cell phone. Your mind goes where your hand is. Your mind goes where your fingers are. Your mind goes what you touch. If you're learning and you've got a sefer in front of you, and you're holding the sefer, and you're using your fingers to point with the Gemara, you learn with your fingers. It's one of the first things my father taught me before we even started learning. The first page of Gemara, the first time we opened a Gemara, the very first thing he taught me is 2 fingers. To learn Gemara, you need 2 fingers, one on the Gemara, one on the Rashi. So that your mind doesn't wander as you're looking for the Rashi on the piece of Gemara. Your mind doesn't wander for a second. You're able to move from Gemara to Rashi and back again. You need 2 fingers on the Gemara. And he was very makpid. Fingers, you've got to be touching the word, because that physical contact focuses the attention. And we see that from this Gemara. Touch the tefillin, because the physical contact focuses the attention. When you're davening, follow the words with your finger. Use your finger. It's not just for children to use their finger in case they lose the place. Using your finger is a method of connecting your mind to the word. It goes through your body. That's part of how the very tefillin work. The idea of the tefillin shorosh, we talked about tefillin being makshava. The Avnei Nezer said in the Shem Mishmur a few days ago, that tefillin for lo pilalti comes from the word machshava, to think. It's a consciousness, it's awareness. That's the tefillin shorosh. And the tefillin shel yad is down the arm all the way to the finger. So the whole idea of tefillin is the connection between mind and touch. So the touching of the tefillin is part of giving expression to the very mitzvah of tefillin. That what you touch, you focus on. What your finger points at is what you focus on. And to be very careful about using our hands as part of the process of learning and of understanding. That's part of the problem when you're learning from a screen. You don't touch the screen, especially if you've got a touch screen. Every time you touch the screen, there's a problem. So you don't touch the screen, even the phone. You don't touch it, or you don't follow it on the thing, because then your phone scrolls. So we don't touch, we just hold the phone. So we've lost the touch. Literally, we've lost the touch. The idea of having a sefer that you point to the word, it's a completely different. That's why when we do Kriyas HaTorah, we have a thing called a yad. We have a silver in many shuls, it's silver, whatever it is, a decorative instrument that looks like a yad that the Baal Kori uses. He doesn't use his finger with the Sefer Torah so as not to damage the Sefer Torah, and also because of the Kedusha Sefer Torah, we don't touch it physically with our hand, but you still point, and you use the pointer. The pointer's there not just to show the person who's been called up where the place is. The point is not just to keep, so that you don't lose the place. It's not about not losing the place. It's about keeping your mind focused on word for word, each single word, and allowing your mind to connect with the word. That's what we learn from this piece of Gemara. And therefore the Rambam says in Halacha Kaf Hey, if you treat tefillin in this way, Kedushat tefillin, Kedushatan Gdolahi, Shekol Zman Shat-tefillin Barosho Shel Adam V'Alzrohu Anav V'Yarei Shemayim. Whenever a person is wearing tefillin, says the Rambam, he's modest, he's humble, he's God-fearing. Ve'eno nimshach bischok, and he doesn't get distracted by light things that are trivial. Uvesicha b'teila, and unimportant conversation. Ve'eno meharer machshavot raot, and he doesn't think about bad things. Elo mefaneh libo b'divrei ha'emet v'tzedek. He applies his mind to things of truth and justice. That's what he's thinking when he's got his tefillin on. Now the Rambam is not suggesting that's automatic. What the Rambam is suggesting is that if you practice tefillin the way you have to, the way the Rambam's described it in Halacha Yud Gimel and Yud Dalet and the other halachas in between, if you practice tefillin the way the halacha requires you, then your mind will be on the right things. Otherwise, you're not being mekayem mitzvah tefillin. That's the mitzvah of tefillin. The mitzvah of tefillin is not just to put a black box on your head. The mitzvah of tefillin is to focus your mind in certain directions and in certain ways. That's the mitzvah of tefillin. That's why tefillin is machshava. Tefillin is a mind mitzvah. It's where you put your mind. And it links to what we discussed on last week on the whole issue of pornography and all these issues that we have today. And it's not about just telling our children, teenagers and adults not to do these things. It's about taking the mind and putting it somewhere else. You've got to put the mind, immerse the mind in other places and in other things so that it's not free to wander into the areas that it shouldn't be. And tefillin does that. And look what the Rambam says. He doesn't say that when you're wearing tefillin, you've got to be thinking about tefillin, which is what he implies in the previous halachas that we learned. But divrei haemet v'tzedek, as long as you're thinking of truth and justice, you're thinking of great, good things, your mind is in a good place. That's what's important. Therefore, ideally, one should wear tefillin the entire day. A very important ritva and rosh, very classical pieces on the sugya. Where the Ritva asks, why are you allowed to take a nap with your tefillin on? A nap means just putting your head down, or you're very tired and you're drifting off, you're nodding off, you're falling asleep just for moments. We're not talking about lying down with your tefillin. Just sheinat harai. Why is that allowed? The Gemara says that's allowed. V'yesh lomar delehesech hadat lo kapdinan ela kishu er v'libo poneh lidvarim betelim. Hesech hadat means that Ritva is defining hesech hadas and Sukkah Daf Chovav. Hesech hadas means distraction is defined as taking your mind off what you're doing and putting it on things that are irrelevant, on irrelevant things. Because you've got to think good things. But if you're not thinking about irrelevant things, even if you're not thinking about tefillin, such as when you're dozing off, you're not thinking about anything, that's okay, as long as your mind is not somewhere else. Because if your mind is somewhere else, it's not here. What happens if your mind is just not here? You're just daydreaming, you're not thinking of anything. Or you're dozing off. Why is that okay? Your mind is still not here. So here you see the difference between eradicating and forgetting something. Taking your mind off something, it's what you were thinking about is still there. Your mind is just drifted off. But when you apply your mind to something which is qualitatively different, so it's not emes v'tzedek, it's divrei chol, it's something which is not connected at all to Torah and to the mitzvah of tefillin. That's not distraction, that's eradication. That's why you're allowed to learn Torah with your tefillin on. It's really why you're learning Torah. You're learning Kodshim, you're learning Bovakame, you're learning Rosh Hashanah. You're not thinking about tefillin during those times. He says it doesn't matter because you haven't taken your mind out of Torah. As long as your mind's not out of Torah, you're still engaged, and you might not be thinking of it at that time, but it's still there. It's not eradicated. The Rosh goes further and he says it's not just thinking about Dvorim B'Tenim is not the issue. He says even when you're working, because clearly you're allowed to work during the day, and the Rambam says you should wear your tefillin all day. How can you wear your tefillin all day at work if you're not allowed to take your mind off your tefillin? Says the Rosh, he goes further than the Ritva, and he says that even if you're at work, that's still constructive. It's positive. You're doing what the Torah wants you to do. You're going to work. You're being mekayem mitzvah Torah. You're doing what the Torah wants you to. It's when you start thinking about the soccer game that you have a problem, because there is no mitzvah. Believe it or not, I know many will find this astonishing. To go to work and to trade on the stock exchange, it's a mitzvah. You're mekayem a mitzvah. But to be thinking about the baseball scores, no mitzvah at all. That's actually dvorim b'telim. That's taking your mind out of the world of Torah and putting it somewhere where it doesn't apply. That's called hesech hadas, and that's something which would cause a hefsech and a hesech hadas. Where this becomes incredibly relevant is in the very strict din that we have in Pirkei Avos, kol hashochech davar echad mimishnato ma'aleh alav hakatuv ki'ilu mitchayev benafsho. If a person forgets one thing from his Torah, it's as if he's guilty of a death. It's terrible. So the Mishnah goes on to discuss it and comes to the conclusion, the only time you mitchayev benafsho, the only time it's such a terrible thing to forget, it's not about forgetting in the sense of merely forgetting, it's about deleting. Eradication, not just distraction. Ad sheyeshev v'yasirem milibo. You sit down and you delete the memory from your mind. How do you do that? On your computer, you press delete. How do you delete something from your mind? And Reish Lakish says in our Masechta, further on, Daf Tzadites, Kol ha-meshakeach davar echad mitalmudo over belav. He says a similar wording, except it's an Issa d'oraisa. He doesn't say it's a capital offense, but he uses the word ha-meshakeach, not ha-shocheach. Somebody who causes deletion, who causes one to be not just distraction, but to eradicate from your mind. How do you do that? Yoshev. What does Yoshev mean? You sit and you eradicate. How do you do that? Says the Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah, Kol zman shelo ya'asok belimud hu shocheach. Anytime you're not learning, you're forgetting. And that's actually the eradication. It's not just that you're forgetting something that you can't recall it. It's din shocheach, this type of shikha, this type of forgetting, a forgetting that is actually eradicating the wisdom. So what does that mean? How do you learn all the time? That means when you're at work, we've just said you're allowed to go to work. Even with your tefillin on, says the Rosh, you can go to work. How would you be mekayim this if you're allowed to go to work? So you've got to understand as well that what we're talking about is Kol zman shelo ya'asok belimud. Torah is not an activity. Torah is a lens through which you experience the world. Are you processing or are you observing? If you're observing, you're not processing, it's not limud. If you're processing, you're reading something and you're thinking yourself from a Torah perspective, where does this fit in? You're working in your work and you're thinking about Hilchos Chosh and Mishpat. How do I do this according to the halacha? You're at work and you're thinking of the fact, I'm fulfilling the will of Hashem. And you're aware of that all the time. That's limud. You're applying the lens of Torah to life experience. While you're applying the lens of Torah to life experience, that's not called shelo ya'asok belimud. He doesn't even say shelo ya'asok belimud Torah. He says shelo ya'asok belimud. Are you a learner? Or are you just taking in information? If you're taking in information without processing, sometimes you might even be taking in Torah information without processing. That's not limud. You've got to be oyesek belimud. A Jew is always learning, no matter what's happening in his life. Every little event, every little experience, every interaction, every engagement, everything he reads, he's loimed. He learns it. What's pshat? What is Hashem trying to tell me with this? What can I learn from this? How can I improve myself through this? As long as you're doing that, you're remaining connected, because what the Rambam wants is connection. You can see from the Rambam that we learned in Hilchos Tefillin also, when he says, even a moment you can't take your mind off Tefillin. Yes, but you're davening, you're learning, you might even be at work during the day, but you're connected. What the Rambam learns from our Gemara, the same as the Tzitz, is that you don't disconnect, because the moment you disconnect, you eradicate wisdom. It's not a temporary thing. It's not just, I'll get back to it later. At the moment, I'm disconnected. I'm watching the soccer game on TV, and then I'll get back to my learning. The wisdom that gets eradicated while you're watching the soccer game on TV is something you can't even evaluate. That doesn't get recovered. If you're busy doing mitzvahs, if you're watching the soccer game and you're learning and you're understanding, I don't know how one does that, but maybe one can understand the Tosfos better from the way you watch a soccer game, or you can understand life better if you're learning, you're processing, you're applying the lens of Torah, then you're not eradicating wisdom, you're connected to wisdom. It's like an electrical current. As long as you're connected, it's flowing. When you're disconnected, it's not flowing. And when you're disconnected, you're losing brain cells, so to say, metaphorically. You're losing wisdom which might be irretrievable, in the sense that wisdom, you can develop new wisdom. But don't think that after a distraction, you can pick up from where you left off. That's why Rabbi Akiva, when he hears his wife say 24, I wouldn't mind if he goes back for another 12 years. Rabbi Chaim Shmuelevitz used to ask, okay, you heard her say you can go back for 12 years. She's an honest woman. She's not going to backtrack. Go in and say Shalom Aleichem to her. You're standing right outside the door. She's suffered for 12 years without her. Go in, have dinner with her. Take her out for dinner and then go back to yeshiva. And Reb Chaim used to say, because 12 and 12 is not 24. Once you've had a hesech hadas, you can't put that together again. That's the power of distraction. And I know I'm describing very high levels, but it's not such high levels. It's just a person being conscious of having to be in a state of learning all day, every day, all the time. Doesn't mean with a sefer in front of you. It means experiencing everything that you experience in life is through the lens of Torah and through the power of learning.